The distant thunder of hooves against the dry earth sent Fiona Summers scrambling to gather her meager belongings, her trembling hands betraying the fear that had become her constant companion since fleeing Bozeman 3 months prior. Her 6-month-old son Thomas slept peacefully in his makeshift cradle, unaware of the danger that seemed to follow them like a shadow across the Montana territory of 1875. "Not again," Fiona whispered, peering through the cracked window of the abandoned homestead she'd claimed for the night. The sunset painted the prairie in gold and crimson, silhouetting the approaching rider against the fiery sky. She'd learned the hard way that strangers meant trouble for a woman alone with a child and no husband to speak of. She tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear and reached for the old revolver she'd traded her mother's silver brooch for in the last town. The weight of it felt foreign in her palm, but she'd sworn to protect her son at all costs. The rider slowed as he approached, and Fiona's breath caught in her throat. He wasn't the man she feared, not her son's father, but strangers carried their own dangers. She watched as he dismounted, a tall figure in trail-worn clothes, his movements betraying exhaustion. "Hello, the house," called a deep voice, raspy from trail dust. "Anyone about? My horse has gone lame and I could use some water." Fiona remained silent, hoping he'd move on. Thomas stirred in his sleep and she froze, praying he wouldn't cry out. "I mean no harm," the man continued. "Just passing through to Copper Creek. Name's Rylan O'Malley." Something in his voice, perhaps the genuine fatigue or the straightforward introduction, made Fiona hesitate. Winter would arrive soon and she couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, she'd need to trust someone. "There's a well out back," she called, keeping the revolver ready. "Help yourself, but be on your way before dark." Through the window, she watched him lead his limping horse around the side of the cabin. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to the frontier, but without the menacing swagger of the outlaws she'd encountered on her journey. His dark hair was overlong beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw. When Thomas began to fuss, Fiona quickly lifted him to her shoulder, bouncing gently to quiet him. The soft cries had already carried through the thin walls. "You have a little one," Rylan observed when he returned to the front of the cabin. He remained a respectful distance from the door. "I've got some jerky and cornmeal in my saddlebags. Not much, but I'm happy to share." Fiona's stomach growled traitorously. Her own supplies had dwindled to a handful of dried beans and the last of a stale loaf. "Why would you offer food to strangers?" she asked suspiciously. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it," he replied simply. "And that's a powerful, thin cry. Your little one sounds hungry." After a moment's consideration, Fiona unlatched the door but kept her body positioned to shield Thomas. "You can come in, but I'll be watching you, Mr. O'Malley." Rylan nodded, removing his hat as he entered. Up close, she could see his eyes were a clear blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. They crinkled slightly at the corners when he offered a tentative smile. "How old?" he asked, nodding toward Thomas. 6 months, Fiona answered, not elaborating further. Rylan didn't press. He set about preparing a simple meal from his provisions, moving deliberately to avoid alarming her. As he worked, he spoke of inconsequential things: the weather, the condition of the trails, news from the nearest settlements. "Heading anywhere in particular?" he eventually asked, stirring the cornmeal porridge he'd made. "West," she replied vaguely. "Looking for work. Alone." The question held no judgment, merely concern. "My husband died," she lied, the words bitter on her tongue. "Mining accident," Rylan nodded, serving the porridge into 2 chipped bowls he'd found on a shelf. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam, Mrs. Summers," she supplied, then hesitated. "Fiona." They ate in relative silence, broken only by Thomas's occasional gurgles. The warm food settled in Fiona's stomach like a forgotten luxury. "That's a fine boy you have," Rylan commented as Thomas grabbed at Fiona's finger. "Strong grip. He'll make a good horseman someday." "If we live that long," Fiona murmured, then flushed at having spoken her fear aloud. Rylan's expression sobered. "You're running from someone." It wasn't a question. Fiona stiffened, calculating how quickly she could reach the revolver she'd set aside to eat. "I don't mean to pry," he added quickly. "But if you're in trouble, I might be able to help. I'm heading to my brother's ranch near Copper Creek. He's always looking for kitchen help, and there'd be a roof over your heads." "Why would you help us?" Fiona challenged, suspicious of his generosity. Rylan shrugged. "Like I said, someone once did the same for me. My mother and I were on our own after my father died in the war. A rancher gave her work and a place to stay when no one else would. I was about 10 then." His gaze softened as he looked at Thomas. "Every child deserves a chance." Outside, a cold wind rattled the shutters, reminding Fiona of the approaching winter. She'd planned to reach Oregon before the snow, but progress had been slower than anticipated with a baby in tow. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Rylan nodded, not pushing further. "My horse needs rest anyway. I'll sleep in the barn tonight if you don't mind, and we can talk more in the morning." After he left for the barn, Fiona sat by the window, watching the darkness settle over the prairie. Thomas slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny face relaxed in the flickering firelight. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to consider a future beyond mere survival. Morning brought clear skies and the aroma of coffee brewing. Fiona emerged from the cabin to find Rylan tending a small fire outside, his horse looking somewhat recovered. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Found some beans in my pack." Fiona accepted a cup gratefully, cradling Thomas with her other arm. The hot liquid warmed her from the inside, chasing away the chill of the autumn morning. "Your offer," she began hesitantly. "About your brother's ranch, still stands," Rylan confirmed. "It's 3 days' ride from here. You and the boy could ride double with me until we reach Copper Creek." The idea of sharing a saddle with this stranger made Fiona uneasy, but the alternative remaining alone and vulnerable as winter approached seemed increasingly foolhardy. "I have a small wagon," she admitted, "hidden in the trees behind the property. I couldn't bring it closer for fear of attracting attention." Rylan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Smart thinking. We can hitch my horse to it once his leg improves. Should only take a day or two." Those 2 days stretched into 4 as Rylan's horse needed more recovery time than expected. During their wait, a tentative trust began to form between them. Rylan repaired the cabin's leaky roof and chopped enough firewood to last several days. Fiona, in turn, used her limited supplies to prepare meals that were more satisfying than either had enjoyed in weeks. She learned that Rylan had fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War despite his youth, then drifted west afterward, working cattle drives and taking odd jobs. He spoke of his brother's growing ranch with pride, describing land that sounded like paradise compared to the harsh existence Fiona had known. On the 4th evening, as they sat before the fire, Thomas crawling on a blanket between them, Rylan finally asked the question Fiona had been dreading. "The boy's father, he's who you're running from, isn't he?" Fiona's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. For a moment, she considered another lie, but something in Rylan's steady gaze compelled honesty. "Yes," she admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think." Rylan waited patiently as she gathered her courage. "I worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy cattle broker in Bozeman," she began. "Mr. Blackridge was a widower with political aspirations. I was foolish. He made promises." She swallowed hard. "When I told him about the baby, he offered money to take care of the problem. When I refused, he threatened me." "Threatened how?" Rylan's voice had hardened. "Said he'd have me arrested for theft if I ever told anyone, that no one would believe a servant girl over him. When Thomas was born, he said he'd have the baby taken away, claimed I was unfit." Her voice broke. "So I ran. Took what little I had and fled in the night." Rylan's jaw tightened. "A man who'd deny his own blood isn't worthy of the name father." "He has influence," Fiona continued. "Friends in law enforcement. I've heard rumors he's offered rewards for information about me." All the more reason to get you to Copper Creek, Rylan said firmly. It's far enough from Bozeman that his reach won't extend there and isolated enough that strangers are noticed. The sincerity in his voice gave Fiona courage. By morning, they had loaded her few possessions into the small wagon and set out toward Copper Creek, Rylan's horse moving steadily despite its recent injury. The journey took 5 days instead of the expected 3, slowed by rough terrain and Fiona's need to stop frequently for Thomas. Throughout the trip, Rylan proved himself a patient traveling companion, never complaining about the delays and always alert for potential dangers. They established a comfortable routine. Rylan would hunt or fish while Fiona prepared camp and tended to Thomas. In the evenings, they'd share stories by the campfire, Fiona speaking of her childhood in Missouri before her parents died of fever, Rylan recounting adventures from his years on the frontier. On the 4th night, as they camped beside a small creek, Fiona noticed Rylan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher as she sang softly to Thomas. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious. "You're good with him," Rylan said. "Patient, kind." "He's all I have," she replied simply. "He's fortunate to have you fighting for him." Rylan stoked the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "My father never knew me, died at Antietam before I was born." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. Rylan shrugged. "Can't miss what you never had." "My mother spoke well of him, though, said he was a good man." "Thomas won't have even that," Fiona whispered. "No good memories of his father to share." "Some men don't deserve remembering," Rylan replied firmly. "The kind of man who'd threaten a woman carrying his child isn't worth your tears or the boy's thoughts." His words brought unexpected comfort, and for the first time, Fiona allowed herself to imagine a future where she and Thomas might find peace. As they crested a final hill on the 5th day, Copper Creek came into view, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley, with scattered homesteads dotting the surrounding countryside. Beyond the settlement, a large ranch spread across the landscape, its boundaries marked by sturdy fencing. "O'Malley land," Rylan announced proudly. "My brother Patrick has built something fine here." Fiona felt a flutter of apprehension. "Will he welcome strangers?" "He'll welcome you because I ask it," Rylan assured her. "Patrick's a fair man. Lost his wife in childbirth 2 years back, so he has a soft spot for little ones." The main house of the O'Malley Ranch was larger than Fiona had expected, constructed of solid timber with a wide porch and glass windows, luxuries on the frontier. Several outbuildings surrounded it, and cattle grazed in nearby pastures. A tall man with the same blue eyes as Rylan emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. His expression shifted from surprise to delight when he recognized his brother. "Rylan." "Didn't expect you for another week," Patrick called, striding toward them. He stopped short when he noticed Fiona and Thomas in the wagon. "You've brought company." "Patrick, this is Fiona Summers and her son Thomas," Rylan introduced them. "They need safe harbor, and I told them you might have work for a good cook and housekeeper." Patrick's gaze lingered curiously on Fiona before he offered a polite nod. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here, Mrs. Summers. We can certainly use the help." Fiona's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley. We won't be a burden." "Patrick, please," he corrected with a smile. "We're informal here. Let's get you settled." The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment. Fiona was given a small but comfortable room in the main house, with a cradle for Thomas that Patrick had built for his own child before tragedy struck. The work was demanding but fair, and for the first time since fleeing Bozeman, Fiona felt secure. Rylan remained at the ranch longer than he'd initially planned, helping with autumn preparations and spending increasing amounts of time with Fiona and Thomas. The baby had taken to him immediately, reaching for Rylan whenever he entered a room. One evening, as Fiona sat on the porch mending clothes after Thomas had been put to bed, Rylan joined her with 2 cups of coffee. "Patrick says you've been a godsend," he commented, settling into the chair beside her. Says the house hasn't been this well run since his wife passed. Fiona smiled, accepting the coffee. He's been more than fair. I never expected such kindness from strangers. Not strangers anymore, I'd hope, Rylan replied, his voice low. Their eyes met, and Fiona felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. Over the weeks, she'd grown accustomed to Rylan's presence, his quiet strength, his gentle way with Thomas, the respect he showed her at every turn. No, she agreed softly, not strangers. The moment was interrupted by a ranch hand galloping into the yard, his horse lathered with exertion. "Riders coming," he called. "6 men asking about a woman and baby. They're showing some kind of notice with a picture." Fiona's cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the porch boards. "He's found us," she whispered, terror clawing at her throat. Rylan was on his feet instantly. "Get inside, take Thomas and hide in the root cellar. I'll handle this." "They'll arrest you for harboring us," Fiona protested, even as she moved toward the door. "Let me worry about that," Rylan insisted. "Go now." Heart pounding, Fiona scooped Thomas from his cradle and hurried to the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and stored vegetables. She cradled Thomas close, trying to quiet her ragged breathing so she could hear what was happening above. Muffled voices drifted down Rylan's, Patrick's, and others she didn't recognize. The conversation seemed tense but controlled. Then heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen floor directly overhead, and Fiona pressed herself against the earthen wall, praying Thomas wouldn't cry. Time stretched interminably in the darkness. Thomas, perhaps sensing her fear, remained unusually quiet, his tiny fingers clutching her dress. Eventually, the sounds of horses departing reached her ears, but still she waited, afraid to emerge. The trapdoor opened an hour later, revealing Rylan's concerned face. "They're gone," he said, reaching down to help her up. "For now." In the kitchen, Patrick stood with a grim expression. "They had wanted posters," he explained, "claiming you kidnapped the child from his rightful father." "That's a lie," Fiona exclaimed, clutching Thomas tighter. "We know that," Rylan assured her. "We didn't confirm you were here, but they're checking every homestead in the area. They'll be back." "I'll have to run again," Fiona said, despair washing over her. "No," Rylan's voice was firm. "Running isn't the answer, not anymore." "What choice do I have? He'll never stop looking." Rylan exchanged a glance with his brother before turning back to Fiona. "There might be another way. Judge Wilson arrives tomorrow for the circuit court. He's a fair man, known for putting children's welfare first." "You want me to fight him legally?" Fiona asked incredulously. "He has money, influence, and you have witnesses to his threats," Rylan countered. "You have a respected rancher's testimony about your character. Most importantly, you have a community that will stand with you." Patrick nodded in agreement. "The men who came today didn't make a favorable impression. Too eager to search without permission, making threats. People here don't take kindly to outsiders throwing their weight around." Hope and fear warred within Fiona. "If I lose—" "You won't," Rylan promised. "But if the worst happens, we have contingency plans." That night, Fiona couldn't sleep. She sat by Thomas's cradle, watching his peaceful slumber and wondering if she was making the right choice. A soft knock at her door startled her. "It's me," Rylan called quietly. She opened the door to find him looking as troubled as she felt. "I couldn't sleep either," he admitted. "May I come in?" Fiona hesitated, then nodded, acutely aware of the impropriety but needing the comfort of his presence. Rylan settled into the room's single chair while Fiona perched on the edge of her bed. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, the only sound Thomas's soft breathing. "I've been thinking," Rylan finally said, "about what you told me about Thomas's father denying him." Fiona tensed. "What about it? Where I come from, a man stands by his responsibilities. He protects what's his." Rylan's gaze was intense in the lamplight. "That man doesn't deserve to be called Thomas's father, no matter what blood they share." "The law may not see it that way," Fiona whispered. "The law cares about a child's welfare above all else," Rylan countered. "And I've been watching you with Thomas these past weeks. There's no doubt where he belongs." Thomas stirred in his cradle, making small, fussing noises. Fiona rose to check on him, lifting him gently when he began to cry in earnest. "He's teething," she explained, pacing slowly to soothe him. Rylan stood, moving closer. "May I?" he asked, holding out his arms. Surprised, Fiona transferred the baby to him. Rylan cradled Thomas with unexpected skill, humming a low tune that gradually calmed the child's fussing. "You're good with him," Fiona observed, echoing Rylan's earlier words to her. "He makes it easy," Rylan replied, smiling down at the now drowsy baby. "Strong spirit, this one, like his mother." The tenderness in his voice made Fiona's heart constrict. "Rylan, why are you helping us? Really?" He was quiet for a moment, still gently rocking Thomas. "When I first saw you at that cabin, standing there with your gun and your fierce determination to protect your son, something in me recognized something in you. A kindred spirit, maybe, someone who knows what it means to fight for what matters." His eyes met hers over Thomas's head. "The more I've come to know you, the more certain I am that I was meant to find you that day." "That sounds like providence," Fiona murmured. "Call it what you will," Rylan replied. "I only know that I can't imagine riding away from here from you both when this is over." The raw honesty in his voice left Fiona speechless. For so long, she'd been alone with her fears, her struggles. The possibility of someone willingly sharing that burden seemed almost too precious to believe. "What if I lose tomorrow?" she whispered. "What if they take him?" "They won't," Rylan said with quiet conviction. "But if the unthinkable happens, we'll face it together. I promise you that." He carefully placed the now sleeping Thomas back in his cradle. When he straightened, he found Fiona watching him with tears shimmering in her eyes. "Why would you make such a promise to someone you barely know?" she asked. Rylan stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because in some ways I feel I've known you all my life. Because when I look at you and Thomas, I see the family I've always wanted but never dared hope for." His words hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Fiona's heart hammered in her chest as Rylan tentatively reached for her hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she laced her fingers through his, drawing strength from his touch. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be challenging, but you won't face it alone." With a gentle squeeze of her hand, he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Fiona remained standing for a long moment, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. Morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Judge Wilson had indeed arrived for the circuit court, and word of Fiona's situation had spread through the small community. To her astonishment, several women from neighboring homesteads appeared at the ranch, offering to testify to her character despite their brief acquaintance. "We take care of our own here," explained Mrs. Daniels, the blacksmith's wife, as she helped Fiona dress Thomas in his cleanest clothes. "Besides, any fool can see you're a good mother." The makeshift courtroom had been set up in the town's small church. Fiona entered with Thomas in her arms and Rylan at her side, trying to ignore the stares of curious townsfolk. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw him, Frederick Blackridge, sitting at the front with two expensively dressed men who could only be lawyers. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold way, impeccably dressed, radiating entitlement. Their eyes met briefly, and his narrowed in recognition. Fiona clutched Thomas tighter, drawing strength from Rylan's steady presence beside her. Judge Wilson, a weathered man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, called the proceedings to order. Blackridge's lawyers presented their case first, painting Fiona as a scheming servant who had seduced their client and then kidnapped the child when he refused to marry her. "Mr. Blackridge is prepared to be generous," the older lawyer concluded smoothly. "He will not press charges for the kidnapping if Mrs. Summers surrenders the child immediately. He has arranged for a suitable nurse and governess to raise the boy properly, befitting his station." Whispers rustled through the assembled townsfolk. Fiona trembled with rage and fear, but Rylan's hand on her shoulder kept her grounded. When it was their turn, Patrick O'Malley spoke first, attesting to Fiona's character and capabilities as both a worker and mother. Several local women followed, emphasizing how quickly Fiona had integrated into their community and how devoted she was to Thomas. Finally, Rylan stood. His testimony was straightforward but powerful, describing how he'd found Fiona scared but determined to protect her child at any cost. "Your Honor," he concluded, "I've seen many things in my years on the frontier, but I've rarely witnessed the kind of courage this woman has shown. She fled comfort and security to protect her son from a man who threatened to separate them. That's not the action of a schemer, it's the action of a mother who would sacrifice anything for her child." Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Fiona. "Mrs. Summers, I'd like to hear from you directly." Heart pounding, Fiona rose, cradling Thomas close. She recounted her employment in Blackridge's home, his seduction and promises, and his subsequent threats when she refused to handle the pregnancy discreetly. "He told me no one would believe me over him," she said, her voice growing stronger. "He said he would claim I was unfit and have Thomas taken away. I had no choice but to run." "That's preposterous," Blackridge interrupted, standing abruptly. "Your Honor, she's clearly invented these accusations to extort Mr. Blackridge," Judge Wilson cut in sharply. "You'll have your turn to speak. For now, I suggest you control yourself in my courtroom." Blackridge subsided, but his expression was thunderous. The judge turned back to Fiona. "Mrs. Summers, does Mr. Blackridge acknowledge paternity of the child?" "He does not deny it, Your Honor," Fiona replied. "But he has never shown any interest in being a father to Thomas. He offered money only to make us disappear." Judge Wilson studied Thomas, who was contentedly playing with a button on Fiona's dress. "The child appears well cared for, healthy." "He is, Your Honor," Fiona affirmed. "I've given him everything I can, and while it may not be wealth or position, he has never lacked for love or attention." The judge nodded, then turned to Blackridge. "Mr. Blackridge, you may now address the court." Blackridge rose, adjusting his expensive jacket. "Your Honor, I won't dignify most of these fabrications with a response. The simple fact is that the child is my blood, my heir, and I have the means and position to provide him with advantages this woman could never offer." "Do you deny threatening Mrs. Summers when she informed you of the pregnancy?" Judge Wilson asked directly. Blackridge's smile was cold. "I advised her of her options, as any employer would. If she misinterpreted my concern as threats, that speaks to her instability." "And do you deny offering money to handle the pregnancy?" the judge pressed. "I offered assistance, the nature of which she misrepresented," Blackridge replied smoothly. "I merely suggested discretion would benefit all parties." The questioning continued for nearly an hour, with Blackridge maintaining his composed facade. When he finally returned to his seat, Fiona felt sick with worry. He was so convincing, so practiced at presenting the image of a concerned gentleman. Judge Wilson called a brief recess to consider his ruling. As people filed out of the church for air, Rylan led Fiona to a quiet corner. "You did well," he assured her. "The judge saw through him, I'm certain of it." "He's so persuasive," Fiona whispered. "What if, no what ifs," Rylan interrupted gently. "Whatever happens, remember what I promised last night, you won't face it alone." Thomas began to fuss, and Fiona focused on soothing him, grateful for the distraction from her fears. When court resumed, Judge Wilson's expression gave nothing away as he called for silence. "This is a complex matter," he began. "On one hand, we have a father claiming rights to his child. On the other, a mother who has demonstrated dedication and proper care, but who took the child without legal permission." Fiona's heart sank at his framing of the situation. "Mr. Blackridge," the judge continued, "you speak eloquently of providing advantages for the boy, yet I find it telling that, in your entire testimony, you never once referred to him by name." Blackridge shifted uncomfortably as the judge continued. "Mrs. Summers, while I cannot condone your decision to flee rather than seek legal recourse, I understand the fear that motivated it. The testimony of your character from this community has been uncommonly strong for someone who has resided here such a short time." He folded his hands on the table before him. "In matters concerning children, I must consider what arrangement best serves the child's welfare. A child of such tender age requires consistent, loving care, something Mrs. Summers has demonstrably provided." Hope bloomed in Fiona's chest as Judge Wilson continued. "Therefore, I rule that primary custody of Thomas Summers shall remain with his mother." A collective sigh of relief rippled through Fiona's supporters, but the judge raised his hand for silence. "However, Mr. Blackridge, as the acknowledged father, you have certain rights and responsibilities. I order you to provide financial support appropriate to your means, to be determined by this court. In return, you may petition for visitation rights when the child reaches the age of 5, provided such visits do not disrupt his established home life." Blackridge's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous." "You will demand nothing in my courtroom," Judge Wilson interrupted coldly. "My ruling stands. Furthermore, any attempt to remove the child from his mother's custody outside of this court's authorization will be considered kidnapping with all attendant legal consequences." "Do I make myself clear?" After a tense moment, Blackridge gave a curt nod. "Court is adjourned," the judge declared, bringing down his gavel. The church erupted in conversation as Fiona sat stunned, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. Rylan's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "It's over," he murmured. "You won. You and Thomas are safe." Tears of relief streamed down Fiona's face as she clutched Thomas to her chest. Across the room, Blackridge conferred angrily with his lawyers before storming out without a backward glance. Outside the church, well-wishers surrounded Fiona, offering congratulations and support. Through it all, Rylan remained at her side, a solid presence in the swirl of emotions. That evening, back at the ranch, a small celebration was held. Patrick had opened a bottle of good whiskey, and the atmosphere was one of relief and triumph. As night fell and the gathering dispersed, Fiona found herself alone with Rylan on the porch, Thomas sleeping soundly indoors. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Without you, I'd still be running or worse." "You don't need to thank me," Rylan replied. "Seeing you and Thomas safe is all the thanks I need." A comfortable silence settled between them as they gazed at the star-filled sky. Finally, Fiona gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind since the trial. "You said yesterday that you couldn't imagine riding away from us when this was over," she began hesitantly. "Did you mean that?" Rylan turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I meant every word. These past weeks, watching you with Thomas becoming part of your lives, it's changed me, changed what I want for my future." He took her hands in his. "I know it might seem sudden, and I'll understand if you need time, but I want you to know that I've come to care deeply for both of you." "It doesn't feel sudden," Fiona admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like I've been waiting for you without knowing it." Rylan's smile was gentle as he reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I'm not Thomas's father by blood, and I'd never try to replace that connection. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to be the father he deserves, one who will protect him, guide him, love him as his own." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "Thomas already adores you. And his mother," Rylan asked softly, "what does she feel?" Instead of answering with words, Fiona closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a tender kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't yet say. When they parted, Rylan's eyes shone with emotion. "Is that a yes?" "To what?" Fiona teased gently. "You haven't asked me anything specific." Rylan laughed, then grew serious again. "Fiona Summers, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me to be a father to Thomas and perhaps, God willing, more children someday?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Fiona and Rylan exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers on the O'Malley ranch. Thomas, now a year old and taking his first unsteady steps, was the center of attention, toddling between his mother and new father with delighted giggles. As Rylan lifted Thomas into his arms after the ceremony, the boy patted his face with pudgy hands, babbling happily. "I think he approves," Patrick observed with a grin. "He's a smart boy," Rylan replied, his arm slipping around Fiona's waist. "Knows a good thing when he sees it." That night, after the celebrations had ended and Thomas was asleep in his new room in the cabin Rylan had built for them on a corner of the ranch, Fiona joined her husband on their porch. "Happy?" Rylan asked, pulling her close. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "I was thinking," he said, his voice contemplative. "Now that things are settled, maybe we should consider adding to our family someday. Give Thomas a brother or sister." Fiona smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently over her abdomen. "Someday might be sooner than you think." Rylan's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as he understood her meaning. "Truly, you're certain?" "The doctor confirmed it yesterday," she nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Both of you, all of you." "And we love you," Fiona replied, her heart full to bursting. The man who became a father not through blood, but through the far stronger bonds of choice and love. As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Fiona reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun in fear and desperation had transformed into something beautiful and enduring, a family forged not by circumstance, but by choice, bound together by love that had proven stronger than any threat or challenge. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and flourished on the land they called home, Fiona often thought of that fateful day when a stranger with kind eyes had offered help when she needed it most, and how those simple acts of kindness had changed the course of all their lives forever.